Hello and welcome. We're going to get started here. Thank you all for coming. I'm Diana Selig. I'm in the history faculty here at CMC, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Carrie Davidson. So thank you for coming, Carrie. Carrie graduated from Claremont Men's College in 1975, and he followed a typical path for a CMC alum. He went into law, politics, and gay activism. And so we're really glad to have you here today. Carrie has been involved in LGBT work and community work in a variety of ways. Professionally, he's a lawyer who specializes in political and nonprofit organization law. He was the first LGBT president of the California Political Attorneys Association, which gave him the Alan Tebbetts Award, and Carrie and his law firm have represented many LGBT organizations over the years. Carrie has also been on the board of Equality California and the Equality California Institute, and has been active on the board and in other ways with Congregation Kol Ami. Here at CMC, Carrie has been a dedicated alumnus. He served on the board of trustees. He was the first LGBT president of the CMC Alumni Association. He's been a member of the board of governors of the... Good point. The first publicly LGBT president of the Alumni Association. He served on the board of the Rose Institute, and he was the recipient of the Jack Stark Distinguished Service Award in recognition of his service to the college. He's currently still active on the past President's Council of the Alumni Association. So Carrie, we're really glad to have you here today. Thank you very much for joining us.
So I don't usually talk about my personal life. I've been to CMC many times to talk about being an election lawyer because I am an election lawyer. And I wanted to be an election lawyer since my sophomore year at CMC. I was part of the first cohort of CMC students to participate in the CMC Washington semester. I'm an American, which I understand is not what we're supposed to say today, but that's what we learned growing up. I was born in this country. I'm Jewish. My parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and as far back as I can imagine, were peasants somewhere, and but they were all Jewish, and I continue to choose to be a practicing Jew. I'm an out gay man. I'm quite certain I was born gay. I look back on the choices I made, what I liked, what I didn't like. No one enrolled me in classes to teach me to be gay. In fact, when I was growing up, I was taught how to be straight. That was a presumption. There weren't other options. It wasn't similar to becoming a lawyer or being American or Jewish. My parents weren't gay. They didn't tell me I was gay. My teachers didn't tell me I was gay. My relatives and friends didn't tell me I was gay or what it meant to be gay. But let's return to CMC in 1971, when I was an entering freshman. It was Claremont Men's College, Diana said. Men's college is not the same as a coeducational college. Word Elliott can tell us about that, I'm sure. I arrived on campus just about to turn 17, as I recall. I was short. I weighed less than 120 pounds. I'd never visited the campus, even though I lived my entire life in the San Fernando Valley. It's hard to believe a campus visit wasn't mandatory. I met the dean of admissions at my high school. My rabbi had told me to go to CMC. I applied for early admission and was accepted, and that was that. I didn't date or socialize much in high school. I studied and was involved in a ton of extracurricular activities, most with an academic slant. We were a typical 1950s family in the 1960s and 1970s, and my mom was a homemaker who took us to school, made our meals, baked every day. My dad came home for lunch. We ate dinner as a family. We saw my grandparents every Sunday. I was fascinated with politics, but wasn't involved except as an observer. Going away to college was a big deal for me, and I wasn't going very far away. My parents dropped me off. I got my room in Marks, met my roommate, my RA. I remember my mom asking the RA about Jewish High Holy Day services. He was Jewish, but he didn't seem particularly interested in the holidays. We were assigned big brothers to act as orientation sponsors. I know we learned 2 songs that we were to sing at various script storms. The following morning, here, let me sing one of them for you. Very embarrassing, but you'll put up with it. Just put her in the corner and turn the lights down low. Put your arms around her waist, your lips on hers must go. And if she starts to murmur a bit objectingly, just tell her it's the sacred seal of dear old CMC, old CMC. Hard to imagine. Welcome to college, and so it began. I wasn't out in high school. I wasn't out in college. No one was out in college. I had a number of gay classmates, people who later came out or stayed in the closet, depending on their personal comfort level. A person I knew from high school went to Pitzer. He appeared to be gay. We never discussed it. One didn't discuss those things. No one was gay at CMC. I thought one of the professors was gay. He hung out at the pool and was thin. But I'm fairly certain he was straight. I know he was straight. In college, I decided to pursue 3 majors: political science, public policy, and Jewish studies. I toyed with becoming a rabbi, but being a lawyer seemed a lot easier. And I was very active in college, not very sexually active, but involved in a lot of activities. And I figured out how to get good grades. It didn't seem a whole lot different from high school. I wasn't a big fan of law school. Reading cases wasn't and isn't my thing. I found a practice area where cases are few and far between. There are seminal US Supreme Court cases in election law and not too many others. I got out of school, went to work at a law firm that told me I could do election law. They lied. I had to do administrative law, which is a lot like litigation, which is all about reading cases. And I worked very long hours and didn't enjoy what I was doing. Election law was a practice area that didn't exist when I was in law school. When I said I wanted to do that, most people laughed or told me that was something to do as an avocation. I identified one small Los Angeles firm that was specializing in election law. It was actually a satellite office of a San Francisco firm that was also small. And my future and current law partner actually headed the office. That was in 1980. But he left the office to accept a political appointment in Sacramento. Why am I telling you all of this? I was out of a job, and after not working for several months, a political consulting firm hired me to write speeches and work on an independent expenditure campaign effort. And yes, there were independent expenditure campaigns in the 80s, long before Citizens United. So if you want to talk about election law, I'm happy to explain how all that works. I had a lot more time to think about my sexual orientation when I wasn't working. I didn't, but I had a lot more time to think about it. Mostly I was trying to determine how to pay my bills, and I spent hours and hours and hours at the gym, which was kind of fun. I got a job at Hughes Aircraft Company, California's largest private employer at the time, running the Political Action Committee. It was a mix of election law, civic involvement, and politics, very CMC. I liked the work, but it didn't pay enough. And so my old boss, the one for the small Los Angeles firm, he quit his government job. He started his own law practice in Orange County. He needed help. I got permission from Hughes to become of counsel to him as a way to earn some extra money. Turned out that I can make more money in my part-time job than my full-time job, and so then I left Hughes. But coming out, let's talk about being gay. Coming out. It's a long and difficult process for me. I didn't think too much about sexual orientation, as I said. I didn't date. In my spare time, I hung out with friends. Some became couples, some got married. I began meeting people. I'm sure others knew I was gay. I wore purple hot pants with a button fly when I was at CMC. I don't know what I was thinking. I wore very non-traditional suits at work, lots of different colors, such as pink, green, lavender, and I almost always wear brown. Somehow I didn't today. I liked the way they looked. Blue or gray seemed awfully dull. I was still super thin, and I spent a huge amount of time at the gym. I did high-impact aerobics. On my 30th birthday, I did 5.5 hours of aerobics. Then I put on a black suit and went to work because I was in mourning, thinking that that was really, really, really old, which it is for many of you. Men started asking me to dinner or to go to their apartments. I knew they were gay. I had conversations with gay people about their lives. Friends would arrange for gay people to be at social gatherings I attended. I read some gay publications. Gay people were beginning to come out at work, but just beginning, not really. The AIDS epidemic began. Life was changing for gay men. I didn't go to bars or dance clubs. One night, a coworker of mine asked if he could stop by my condo. I said yes. He asked if he could kiss me. I said yes. When I think back on that conversation, it was really similar to the rules on college campuses today. And suddenly I was dating a man, and I was 31 years old. I distinctly remember saying no one could know about our relationship. I said my parents would disown me if they knew. I assumed I would be fired at work. He and I both worked for Hughes Aircraft, a defense contractor. I had a security clearance. Why I needed that, I don't know. I was making campaign contributions. The man I was dating was really out. He was on a TV commercial. I explained to everyone that I wasn't out. I couldn't be out. It wasn't unusual at the time. This was the 80s. It was fairly typical not to be out to family, to friends, to coworkers. Gay men were dying. People I had just met were being diagnosed with AIDS, and most didn't live long. The man I was dating was tested, and he was positive. I didn't take that well. I didn't know much about being gay or AIDS. It all seemed really scary. I knew I had to be tested. I was negative. Our relationship wasn't going to last. More and more people learned I was gay. I started being more involved in the gay and lesbian community, although I was still highly closeted. 1990, I was 35 years old. Dating was easy in the gay community. I had always assumed my appearance and my social awkwardness were impediments to finding a romantic partner. I assumed I would be single my whole life. I didn't understand that if I had focused on men rather than women, my sex life would have been far more active. You see, I went to an orthodontist as a teenager, and the doctor told me I would never get married unless I had my teeth straightened. I didn't proceed with orthodontia. I'm not into pain, and I figured the doctor was right, but he wasn't. For some unknown reason, the cutest and fittest man at the gym, the place where if you don't go to dance clubs and bars, you could meet gay men, asked me to go out with him, and that was 27 years ago. We're still together, and yes, we're married. I wasn't out to my family. I wasn't out at the office. I left my job at Hughes to work with my former boss. It's where I still work. My law partner never asked about my personal life. He got married and divorced a few times. We hired a couple of gay men at our office. They knew gay friends of mine. They knew I was gay. Politically active gay people started asking me to do political work for them. I closed down the first gay political action committee in the history of the world. It was called MECLA, and then that was replaced by an organization called ANGLE. 25 years later, I'm now closing that down. I came out to my family and friends. My friend, my now husband, moved in with me. We went to family events together. We went to social events together. We went to CMC events together. I became the first out president of the Political Attorneys Association, as Diana said. Then in rapid succession, the first out president of the Alumni Association. And when you're president of the Alumni Association, you serve on the board of trustees. big honor. The trustees and the administration didn't really know how to deal with me. Well, they knew how to deal with me. They knew me. But they especially didn't know how to deal with my significant other. We invited the Alumni Association board to our house, as John Ferrando will probably recall. The college, and things that seemed like nothing were a big deal. They included my boyfriend's name on the invitation to the other people on the alumni board. Huge deal. Jill Stark, who was running the Ath at the time, treated us as a married couple for seating purposes, which meant that you didn't sit next to the person you were dating, but you sat across the table somewhere. Again, lots of angst into these kinds of decisions, which are commonplace now, second nature, but there wasn't a precedent for that. There was a gay member of the Board of Trustees at the time, but he never brought his partner. Well, there was another member, but that's a different. I became president of this predominantly LGBT temple, which we'd call it gay and lesbian at the time. I mean, I use those words. We have to remember everything was gay and lesbian. The B and T were not part of the typical nomenclature at the time. I was marching in a gay pride parade. I was attending gay pride festival. I was attending all the gay community black tie dinners. I was doing what I do, and then the Knight Initiative, Proposition 22, came along on the California statewide ballot. The Knight Initiative sought to define marriage as a union between a man and a woman. It was a direct attack on the gay and lesbian community. It seemed innocent enough to most people in that era. It was. Marriage had always been between a man and a woman. That's what people thought. Gay people didn't get married. What's the issue? But at the time, my now husband and I were planning a commitment ceremony for our 10th anniversary as a couple. It was to be a Jewish wedding with a rabbi, a chuppah, the exchange of rings, and the breaking of glasses. We had never been to a same-sex wedding. We knew a couple of people who had ceremonies. We figured it was time for us to express our love and commitment to one another in front of our families and friends. We bought the rings, booked the venue, decided to register for a gift, at every point wondering, how would the merchants react to two men doing what had previously been confined to different sex couples? It's a really different time. When you went to sign on things, it was always very, very sex specific. Boy, girl kind of thing, husband, wife. And they went to things like partner one, partner two. That didn't sound very good either, but. So the Knight Initiative was really personal for me. With the consent and encouragement of my straight law partner, my firm offered to do the legal and campaign work pro bono. We weren't in the habit of offering pro bono services on statewide campaigns. We are and were a very small firm, and we charged people for the time that we spent providing that type of work. Unlike most of the campaigns in which we are involved, there was no big corporation funding the effort. There was no trade association. There was no labor union. What we found was disorganized, fractured gay and lesbian people fighting for power and lacking money. We were way behind in the polls. Who would object to the definition of marriage as a union between a man and a woman? We were never going to win. We were having a very difficult time raising money. What was the objective? To cut the margin of defeat. I spent hours and hours every day on the campaign. I had to explain to small nonprofit organizations what they could and couldn't do in the campaign. There was considerable confusion regarding law and reporting requirements for participation in a ballot measure campaign. This was new. This was different. It was the beginning of campaigns filing reports electronically. Computers were making their entry into campaigns. This is all so foreign to you. Previously, all reporting was on paper, big stacks of paper. This was 1999 and 2000. We still file most reports on paper, shockingly, and many electronically as well. There's lots of redundancy. The law hasn't been updated to 2017. Back to my story because, I don't know. Again, I'm always happy to talk about election law. we were planning our commitment ceremony. We were hiring performers, planning the menu, selecting our invitations, sending our save the date card. Our families were having many, many, many conversations about their participation or even attendance at our ceremony. Did attending a commitment ceremony translate to supporting a gay lifestyle? We selected the Saturday closest to our 10th anniversary, which happened to be designated Freedom to Marry Day. We didn't know that. We were recognizing our anniversary date. It was about 1 month prior to the March statewide election presidential primary in which the Knight Initiative would appear on the ballot. The Democratic Convention, where I was the general counsel and the treasurer of the host committee, was a few months away. I was incredibly busy. Life was very hectic. And did I mention my boyfriend's father was chaplain of the United States Senate? He's a Presbyterian minister. He's a televangelist and a prolific author. He was appointed to the post by a Republican Senator Bob Dole, who was then the Senate Majority Leader. His Senate friends were mostly evangelical Christians and mostly Republican traditional family proponents. The notion of gay people as a part of a family was an embarrassment, a flaw. That's what many of us learned growing up. Being gay wasn't normal, being gay was a mental illness. Anyway, my boyfriend's mother put the date of our commitment ceremony on her husband's calendar, and then the negotiations began. There were many heated conversations. Would my cousins attend? Would my boyfriend's Roman Catholic nieces and nephew attend? Ultimately, my boyfriend and I had to agree to no press at our commitment ceremony for my now father-in-law to attend. We weren't planning to have press at our ceremony. We were getting married, or as close to getting married as two men could at the time. But my boyfriend made it very clear that he would go to the press if his father didn't attend. My boyfriend's father sat in the front row at our ceremony. He didn't congratulate us. He didn't give us a gift. He didn't speak with anyone. We actually sat him with the rabbi. It was great. But he was there. The youngest niece and nephew didn't attend. They heard we had a female rabbi, and they were afraid she would have a beard. They were young. But my relatives attended. My brother was best man. My parents were the last people to leave our party. They embraced the fact that we were a couple. Back to the Knight Initiative. It continued to be a disaster. Everyone wanted to be in charge. No one knew what they were doing or how to spend the limited money we possessed. Suddenly, in the final weeks of the campaign, money started pouring in. We couldn't spend it fast enough. Well, frankly, we couldn't spend it. There was nothing to do at the time. The records were in shambles. We hired an outside firm to deal with numerous contributions. The firm couldn't handle the job. The various gay and lesbian leaders at the time were angry with one another. The wealthy gay men stayed mostly on the sidelines. The campaign sent us a nice bouquet of flowers for our commitment ceremony. They did. It was nice. Needless to say, we didn't go on a honeymoon. The election was upon us. We lost badly. We wound up with a large surplus of funds, which we donated to an organization then known as California Alliance for Pride and Equality that was later to become Equality California. It was a very frustrating and unpleasant experience. I continued to be involved with many organizations. I joined the board of Angle. I became part of Lambda Legal. I was active in the Human Rights Campaign. We supported and represented the Los Angeles Gay and Lesbian Center. I became a board member of Equality California. With the success of the Knight Initiative in California, it became popular for states to adopt laws defining marriage as a union between a man and a woman. In the gay and lesbian world, we started including bisexual and transgender people in our work. Previously, organizations had euphemistic names that made the support of lesbian and gay equality somewhat vague. Names were changed to include lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. In California, Equality California started pursuing legislation to prevent discrimination for the LGBT community in employment, healthcare, education, housing, and relationships. We introduced and the legislature adopted bills permitting lesbian and gay people to be married. Initially, we couldn't muster the votes in the legislature. Governor Gray Davis wasn't supportive. We had domestic partner laws by the time. At that time, it was supposed to be enough. Ultimately, a marriage bill passed the legislature and Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed it. Court cases were filed addressing relationships. There were victories, there were defeats. As a marriage case was making its way to the California Supreme Court, opponents of marriage between same-sex couples considered placing a constitutional amendment on the November 2008 ballot. The LGBT community put together a coalition of LGBT organizations to fight that potential measure. I formed a nonprofit corporation for that purpose. We pursued efforts to block signature gathering for the initiative, Signature gathering continued. The California Supreme Court ruled that gays and lesbians could wed their same-sex partners. We were jubilant, and then Prop 8 qualified for the November ballot. That measure was crafted to prohibit marriage between same-sex couples and to include the language in the state's constitution. At the time, I was the vice president of Equality California. I decided to delegate most of my legal work to others in the office. I went to work nearly full-time to defeat Prop 8. As you may know, neither Barack Obama nor Hillary Clinton supported marriage between same-sex couples. At the very end of the campaign, then Obama was the candidate. He did do the right thing, but didn't get much publicity. But I had the opportunity to meet with Senator Obama at the beginning of his campaign with a small group of gay and lesbian people, and I asked him to explain why he couldn't endorse marriage equality, and he explained that he was running for president of the United States, and that I would have to understand. He spoke of his many gay and lesbian friends, but marriage equality was not something he could support. Like many of us in the LGBT community, we hope to avoid a repeat of the experience from the Knight Initiative. It had been 8 years, the attitudes of people had changed, or so we hoped. The LGBT community remained fractured. While we had an umbrella campaign committee, most of the major LGBT organizations formed their own campaign committees because, God forbid, you should join together and do something. Everyone wanted to keep their donors separate. Everyone wanted to raise money from their own group. They didn't want to share the information. We had to negotiate long and hard about how we would transfer those names and send out mail to the people who were in the various organizations. The campaign was starting to resemble the Knight Initiative more and more, except for the polling. The Los Angeles Times reported at the beginning of summer, as I recall, that the opposition to Prop 8, our side, held a significant lead. The LGBT community was really complacent. People assumed we would defeat the measure. Marriages among same-sex couples had begun. We were happy. That was different from 8 years before, but money for the campaign was in short supply. Same story. Considerable infighting. At one point in August, I remember our campaign manager spent literally 3 weeks negotiating with one of these side committees that was headed by the San Francisco city attorney, and it was such a waste of time. And then a new poll at the end of summer showed the supporters of Prop 8 taking the lead. People in the LGBT community couldn't believe it. The campaign manager was replaced. Someone from out of state was brought in to turn things around. There was complete dysfunction. And all of a sudden, money began to flow. We were millions of dollars behind the proponents in terms of money. Eventually, monetarily, we would catch and surpass the proponents. But their ads were working. Ours were not. Ads showing children being taught in school that same-sex marriage was okay proved to be too much for us to overcome. We were talking about rights and discrimination. We probably should have been talking about marrying the person you love. We weren't ready for that. Parents of young children who should have been in the demographic group most likely to oppose the measure shifted to supporting Prop 8. Even in 2008, many LGBT people were not out to their families, friends, and coworkers. They were afraid to say the measure was important to them. We attended wedding after wedding. We got married at a Julie Andrews concert at the Hollywood Bowl. We'd invited a judge and his wife. I know, whatever. To the Hollywood Bowl. We'd obtained our marriage license shortly before licenses, or right after licenses became available. A few days before the concert, I called the judge, asked if he would marry us. He researched the magic language, the shortest thing you could say. On the way to the concert, we informed our other guest, a former CMC Alumni Association president, Lorraine Baines, that we were getting married that night, and we asked her, along with the judge's wife, to be our witnesses. It was a happy time, and we were optimistic that we could defeat Prop 8. Daily, I reviewed solicitations, TV ads, radio ads, direct mail, newspaper ads, electronic ads. I spoke at meetings. I gave advice to organizations galore regarding what they could and couldn't do. I didn't get much sleep. On election night, my husband and I were headed to the highly anticipated victory party for No on Prop 8. We learned that Barack Obama had been elected president. We heard the initial results for Prop 8, and I knew the measure was going to pass. We went to the victory party. The room was too crowded. We decided to go home. And so many people in the country were excited about the election of President Obama, and we were devastated by the adoption of Prop 8. Same-sex marriage immediately stopped. Protests in the streets began. There were rallies and marches. The infighting grew worse. People were blaming each other for the loss. My friends were screaming at me, literally screaming. and asking me why I screwed up. I'm a lawyer. I'm not a campaign consultant. Yeah, I reviewed communications. I did. I made some changes to them, but I'm not a pollster. I was doing my job. I was telling people how to comply with the law. I spoke at the rallies. I participated in the marches. I spoke at press conferences. I was interviewed by newspapers and magazines, by reporters on radio and TV shows. I'm the guy behind the scenes. And I was pushed out front to speak on the campaign's behalf before and after Election Day. And as happened with the Knight Initiative in 2000, we received so much money at the end of the campaign, we couldn't spend it. The surplus funds went to Equality California by virtue of an agreement that the various organizations had. I became president of Equality California almost immediately. Thereafter, the executive director of our organization was excoriated for the campaign's defeat. His role was to raise money, and he did, but we lost. The young people who didn't even vote started their own organizations. They couldn't understand how we lost, but we knew voters weren't ready for their children to be taught that being gay and marrying someone of the same gender was perfectly acceptable. With the surplus funds, we continued and bolstered our efforts to encourage LGBT people to have conversations with their families, friends, and coworkers. Slowly but surely, well, actually quite rapidly, attitudes began to shift. Those of us who were married prior to the election continued to stay married. The California Supreme Court concluded our marriages were valid despite the passage of Proposition 8. And funny thing, our marriages didn't change the marriages of straight people one iota. LGBT people and their allies were angry and frustrated. In 2012, in the presidential campaign, Vice President Biden announced his support of marriage between same-sex couples. President Obama quickly followed. 2015, as you know, the U.S. Supreme Court held that marriages between same-sex couples were covered by the United States Constitution. In the 2016 elections, while most Republican presidential candidates continued to denounce marriage between same-sex people, the reality is that popular opinion had dramatically shifted. Throughout the United States, a significant majority of the population is now in favor of marriage equality. And as for me, I continue to do what I do. I want to make the world a better place. I use the limited skills I possess, the ones I do possess, I learned here, to volunteer and to work for positive change. I focus on ensuring that young people will have better lives and that all people, regardless of their gender, race, ethnicity, or any other identifying criteria will be treated equally and accepted by all. I'm not a natural activist. I'm not loud and boisterous. I have a loud and deep voice, but I'm not comfortable marching or speaking at rallies or even giving radio and TV interviews. I remain behind-the-scenes kind of person. I don't want or expect credit for what I do. I want to be part of a movement that makes a difference and can be proud of what we achieve, even if that's one person at a time. Oh, and I mentioned we learned 2 songs on our first day of freshman orientation. Here's the other. It won't make you sick. Hey, we're from Claremont, our alma mater, and we have a tale to tell about high spirits and traditions, so we'll show the world damn well that we're the freshmen and we are learning of how good men should be. We're proud about it, that's why we shout it, that we're from CMC. That's it, thank you. I don't know, do we have any time for questions or not? Time for questions? Okay. You can ask me about anything or nothing. I'm happy to talk about election law. Professor Elliott. What's next? What's next is acceptance. And how we attain acceptance is different. And that's the one person at a time. And the language we use, the willingness to be out and to discuss what matters to us makes a huge difference. And we'll see what happens with the laws. We'll see what happens with the courts. We'll see. But, I mean, certainly the trajectory is on the side of equality. And I don't think we're going back. Professor Elliott.
What's become of the organization? I'm thinking of the March of Dimes, which conquered
Right. The Freedom to Marry Coalition is out of business. There's a movie this week that you can see in Los Angeles that discusses that effort. But almost all of the other organizations remain. And why do they remain? Because we don't have legal equality. We definitely don't have acceptance. If you look at the laws in both federal laws and state laws in most states, LGBT people are not covered in healthcare and in education and in housing and in employment. And we unfortunately have a long way to go. In California, we're very, very, very fortunate, and we have all these protections. But that is not the case in much of the country. And so the organizations still exist, and post the November election, they've actually been doing quite well in terms of fundraising. And there's a real need. Yes.
I'm curious, because a lot of people, especially in the age groups that we're trying to, persuade that,
People here?
I can mic, yeah. So a lot of people, I think, write us here as college students in general off because of our age, that, oh, we're idealistic, optimistic, et cetera. And in trying to reach people who are, of a different generation, what can we do to more effectively communicate our message that, no, it's not the end of the world when LGBT folk get married, that, no, it's not that we deserve the same rights? How do we communicate that message to people who are, in a different place as us?
So we had a lot of psychologists involved and over the years, and we have major funding from significant foundations. So that rights and discrimination piece sounds really clinical. Talking about love, talking about what matters to you as a human being, talking about your own life, that makes a difference. Because when it's your family, and interestingly, ethnicity-wise, when in Latino families, for example, whenever you talk about familia, made a huge difference. In African-American families, we learned not to use the word like civil rights. Civil rights meant something else. But when you talk about love, when you talk about relationships, when you talk about family, that is really powerful. And that continues to be powerful. So, and it's simple, and yet sometimes it's really hard. And that's the question of, when do you say those things? When is it appropriate? When you don't want to start a fight. You're trying to make a point and say that this matters and trying to make a difference. So we're not so good about that. It's the same thing with coming out. It's just in general, and there are all the right reasons to do so, and sometimes the results are unfortunately not so great, and that's why we see suicide rate of LGBT people still just incredibly high, and so when you back to Professor Elliott, for example, I mean, there's a lot of work to do.
Hi, so in Professor Selig's LGBT history class, we learned about, why marriage and, how marriage made its way through, how we finally attained marriage equality. But from what we learned, most of the ballot boxes and shaders ended up going against, marriage equality. But now that you mentioned that you believe the significant majority of the country supports, marriage equality, and given the fact that the Supreme Court is likely to tilt conservative really soon, will you guys be pivoting towards, more ballot box initiators, or do you think it's going to work its way through the judiciary? Do you get what I mean? Understand my question?
Well, so one of the I don't know if this will directly address your question, but so and it's kind of what Professor Elliott said. So marriage was this big notion, particularly among straight people. For those of us who were doing the work, marriage was just one of many things. Relationships was a piece. The rest of our lives, marriage, okay, yeah, I have a wedding ring, great, I'm married. I love being married. But you want every other protection, and so we deal with immigration. We deal with healthcare. People are afraid to come out to their doctors, and doctors need to know. Marriage was this easy thing in some ways for people to understand because it was a specific event. And once people got the notion when there were marriages and nothing happened to the traditional marriages and traditional families, then there was a pivot. There was also a lot of money that didn't flow to LGBT organizations because people assumed that everything was over, but it's not. I don't know. That doesn't really address what you said, but sort of.
I'm just curious to know, like, strategy-wise, are you guys gonna be going through more like the ballot box and referendums, or is it gonna be more of like judicial kind of?
So well,
Like,
we never want to go to the ballot and talk about people's constitutional rights. It's horrific. We don't want to go to the ballot and talk about anybody's rights based on who they are. And those are all very mean-spirited kinds of measures. And I don't care whether whoever they're directed, to whom they're directed, it's very awful. So no, we want to change public opinion. We want to change individual opinion, and that's the focus. And we want to make sure that the laws are in place so that when you're not treated equally, that you can go to court and a judge will enforce it.
Thanks so much for sharing today. I appreciate you. I appreciate that you also shared that you didn't come out until after college, and unfortunately, I see that in a lot of students still, that they will come out maybe within 5 years after leaving CMC. And I'm just curious in your input as to what do you think the college could do to be more accepting or more of a place where people would feel comfortable coming out, even if they don't feel comfortable at home?
In my case, and I think it's still the same, you need to see role models. You need to see people who look like you, who seem like you, who could be you. You need to have opportunities afforded you where you can access information that maybe you didn't get at home. And it needs to be in a space where you know you are completely safe and completely protected. And that is, I think, the best way. Well, look, when you're in college, you have chances to learn a lot about yourself, and when the materials are made available, things are so much more accessible now. When there wasn't an internet, there wasn't, we had to go walk over to Honnold to go find a book. You don't need to do anything anymore, and the information's readily available. I think it's really important for people who are out to be out, to make themselves available so that anyone who wants to can have easy, comfortable conversations. It's very simplistic.
Thank you for a great talk. That was really wonderful. I wanted to know, following up on Nere's question or your answer to it, how can those of us who unfortunately are not gay be good allies? How can we support our friends, our relatives? How can we support you? Can you give us some concrete actions we can take?
You do exactly what you just said. You tell them that you're supportive. You tell other people in your family that you're supportive. You counter some of the people who seem embarrassed that they have an LGBT person in their family. You say that in your workplace. You say that in your church. You say that in family settings. That's the thing. And it is more powerful, in my opinion, coming from an ally. I'm self-interested, and that's part of the big problem that we faced in all the elections around the country, because people weren't willing to say that. They would always be, oh, my daughter is a lesbian. Okay, well, so of course you're going to be supportive. Well, not necessarily, but that was the deal. Or like, here I am, and here my children and here's my husband, and like, oh no, that's not the same. When you're willing to make the statements to people who trust you, that makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.